Hi, this is Josh Spayer with Coherence Report. I'm a former D-Wave insider and have more than a decade of experience in the AI and the quantum computing space. So for today, we're going to talk about D-Wave's Core 1 of 2026. It's a little bit late, but if you get on our newsletter, we're going to get these out faster, I promise. Just subscribe and you'll be the first one to know. Anyways, I just wanted to get some highlights from what we saw and what our analysis shows when you actually dive into the data. And we're going to talk about why Wall Street analysts are so wrong about this stock. All right, and so with that, let's begin. First off, I want to discuss the revenue numbers. The revenue was 2.9 million versus 4.14 consensus. Think about that for a moment. That's a 30% miss by Wall Street and by the supposed quantum computing experts. That's how far our analysts and our experts are. And this isn't just, I want you to understand, this isn't just a modeling error or a deal that was just lost on the margins. This really shows, this broad of miss just shows how sell-side analysts are completely missing the quantum computing industry. And the flag that really proves this is that once you strip out all the lumpy system sales, there was no revenue growth. And despite everyone assuming that D-Wave is a hyperscale play, none of the major bookings also has hit anything tangible. It's time for people to stop listening to analyst hype. Coherence Report is the only information source out there that predicted this revenue number. This wasn't a lucky guess. It's the fact that we are the only ones who are showing that D-Wave is not growing. Everyone else is pricing in the stock for exponential growth, or they're following feel-good threads. But what you're about to see is that there is no growth. In fact, D-Wave's business, when you look at the numbers, is in decline. So let's talk about the revenue miss. It was a 2.4 actual revenue number versus what everyone else thought was going to be a $4.14 million revenue. And, we're going to ignore the 80% drop year over year because that was from a one-time system sale. In order to evaluate whether D-Wave is actually growing, though, what we're going to do for the purpose of this presentation is we're going to look at recurring QCAS instead. Reason why we did recurring QCAS is that we believe that this is representative of organic growth of D-Wave. Where it came from, we basically pulled the QCAS number as a barometer for how much customers are using their QPU. QCAS is really the best available number. If you want to know whether there's actual commercial demand growing, whether people are actually using their quantum computer, which we're going to see in the D-Wave's QCAS revenue, that there is no growth in how people are using their compute. All right. So if you look at the results of this organic growth, the organic revenue, this is 1.76 versus the 1.53. So it's a modest 17% growth. Now, if you're a Microsoft, that would be exhilarating, right? But we're pricing in a company that's multiples and multiples times revenue. But you look at the figures for all of 2025, this even gets worse. Okay, forget about the 17%. You're talking about a negative 20% drop in revenue, a minus 12% drop in revenue, negative 30% drop in revenue, negative 9% drop in revenue. So if you actually average out all the 5 quarters, including the quarter that did grow, you're actually looking at a negative 11%, actually 11.1% growth of their revenue base. That's for a company that's supposed to be growing like D-Wave. Now, it's been up and down year for quantum computing in general. I want to acknowledge that. It's not just D-Wave. But you got to remember here, D-Wave is the company here where their entire thesis is how they are commercial ready. Remember Alan Barrett saying that they're the only company with quantum applications that are supposedly in production? The investment thesis itself is about them being able to go out and sell compute. So if that's true, why is there no revenue for compute? And by the way, the 17% growth from Q1, it's actually just a difference of $230,000. Let's not, exaggerate what's actually going on here. Okay, $230,000 is enough for a single proof of concept deal. This is in no way demonstrating increased commercial prospects. And by the way, $230,000 is absolutely not something in production. I can tell you that right away. All right, let's look at the bookings. Bookings was really the story for Q1. You had 2 pre-announced contracts and a smattering of small commercial work. This is really highlighted by the $10 million mystery Fortune 100 company and a $20 million FAU system sale, which we've talked about, at length if you read my report. Beyond that, we're only talking about $3.4 million in bookings. Management said over 24 commercial customers, they comprised of over 30% of Q1 bookings. And so you're really talking about $140,000 per deal. The commercial concentration, it's pretty safe to say at $140,000 per deal, the commercial concentration is really poor and the underlying enterprise traction is very modest. You assume that a couple of deals, from my experience, a couple of deals is going to be a couple $100,000, and most of the customers are just using the credit card to pay for some QCAS over the web, some QCAS services. If you back out these 2 deals from bookings, you have $3.4 million versus $1.6 million, and that's the bullish view here is that this forecast an acceleration in revenue. However, they've already said that they're expecting the second quarter to be slow, or what they say, modest growth. I've seen other signs that they are counting bookings differently. And I really think that what's going on here is that they're just accounting for bookings different. But I guess, earnings in a couple of weeks, we shall see. One note I will say, though, just want to be completely fair to this company. I did notice that they were claiming 0.8, so $800,000 of the $10 million RPO from the Fortune 100 QCAS deal. That's now gone, which means that they counted that amount as revenue. I will note, because I want to be fair and balanced, this is a bullish sign. So we do need to keep an eye on that and see if this is that $10 million deal is actually flowing through revenue, because the other deal, the $20 million deal, has absolutely not even touched the books. We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's talk about their stated use cases. Their bookings and RPOs does look fantastic, but they don't even pretend to have anything else going on. The only project that they've talked about on the call was some random blockchain project that they were working on about a year ago, and for some reason are just bringing it up on the earnings call, like Lazarus from the dead. They talked about some project, their quantum AI project, which they love to talk about in every single call. Before it was Japan Tobacco, now it's Shinogi, same company, same deal, same project. They're just, again, resuscitating things like Lazarus. And that's now in the second phase of some proof of concept all the way from 2 years ago, which he says is hopeful that it will go into production, 2.5 years later. Remember from our investment report, we've already talked about how their 2026 users conference was literally the worst they've had in years, with essentially no new clients and no new commercial use cases. So if you didn't read that, please go to our website, look for our investment report. We talk about that in detail, how it was just a terrible terrible user conference. Based on this quarter's results, though, it really looks like they were able to goose 2 major deals, maybe. So one from the unnamed Fortune 100 company we've already talked about, which I believe is AT&T. And then the other one is an obviously fake deal with FAU. Nothing else is going on. Meanwhile, revenue is dropping as a result. Let's talk about the forward guidance. Management was held to no formal guidance, but they did provide directional commentary. The second quarter is expected to be up modestly from quarter one, whatever that means with this company. You're certainly not going to hit your breakers that you guys are, your 100x revenue that you guys are assuming baking into the investment off of modest growth. A substantial portion of the 2026 revenue they're expecting in the second half, targeting 2 to 3 system sales per year. So essentially, they're just basically saying, hey guys, you should expect a slow second quarter, but we promise it's coming around after that. This company is just constantly pushing the ball down to the future. Updates on FAU and the undisclosed deals. So I just want to remind everyone why we believe here that the FAU deal is not real, and with also the mysterious Fortune 100 company, which I believe is AT&T, and it's vastly overstated. Both deals were actually announced at the same exact time in January during Qubits. The FAU deal, it's actually the first time that D-Wave has sold a machine to a U.S. university in nearly a decade, if you remember that. FAU, for those who may not be in the United States and may not know of FAU, and by the way, half the people in the United States probably don't know who FAU is either. To be clear, FAU, Florida Atlantic University, is not an established quantum computing institution. It's not a thought leader. This isn't the next Stanford or MIT that you haven't heard of. This is literally just basically it's a step above a community college is what I would consider it. But it does happen to be in the same city as where D-Wave moved its headquarters to. And it happens to be where Alan Barrett lives. And it happens to be in a location, by the way, that's renowned for millionaires looking out for each other. If the FAU deal is actually legitimate, then we are now assuming that they have cracked open a whole new market. And we are now going to start seeing, we're on the precipice of D-Wave selling quantum computers to every single community college and every single, there's schools all over the country are going to start buying this thing, right? So that might be a bullish signal there. Keep in mind, this isn't just me talking here. I'm reiterating facts and evidence that, or I'm glossing over evidence that is clearly laid out in our investment reports. Go to coherence.report, and you'll be able to look for the information there. Some additional reasons why this deal is just so suspicious. The $20 million from the FAU deal has not turned into a single dollar of revenue yet. The CFO would not explain how revenue from that deal will be recognized. And without the FAU deal, first quarter 2026 bookings, they look entirely flat. So FAU is a university, keep in mind. It's not a commercial customer, so this doesn't do anything to push their thesis that they're a commercial-ready organization. And also, management raised their system sales outlook, but there's just nothing signed to back it back up. What all this means for D-Wave. D-Wave spent all of 2025 talking about how it was the commercial-ready company. It was the only company that is actively being adopted by the enterprise organizations out there. And by the way, it's absolutely not true. IonQ, Quantum, and the other, and Rigetti, and those guys are all selling deals into JP Morgan and all these other companies out there. In fact, they've sold more deals than D-Wave anyways. But D-Wave owns the thesis for whatever reason that it is the commercial-ready organization. And so here's quotes on screen from our trusted CEO, Alan Barrett. I'm not going to read them here, but you've probably seen these over and over again. And look, talking about this actually worked. I mean, in fairness, part of the company's mission is to sell stock to investors, and that really did work. Stock has had quite a run. This actually enabled them to bring in $800 million, and then they spent almost half of it, thus far. And then they raised another $500 million to acquire QCI. So for those who bought stock late last year, thank you for enabling them to buy an overpriced quantum company. But here's the question I'll leave you if you're the only quantum company out there that has real commercial customers, what should the revenue really look like? And I mean, it shouldn't be going down the way that D-Wave's organic revenue traction is going down. What direction should your revenue be going? And where are the use cases and the customers that D-Wave promised us? Why are the only major bookings are suspicious deals that are, these deals are clearly, I can't use that word yet legally, but we're getting there. So to summarize, D-Wave's Q1, when you look at it, it really did demonstrate that, there's declining organic revenue and usage. There's reported use cases that are disappearing. The company is orienting itself away from enterprise and towards government, and the 90% retention rate has not been mentioned since the second quarter of 2025. So tell me what that means. 2 deals in Q1 accounted for 90% of new bookings. We're pricing the stock to be a runaway scaler, hyperscaler. Where's the growth? Where's the growth going to come from this company? They also announced a roadmap with some really ambitious targets. We're gonna dissect this in a future video. I'm not gonna go into it now. We're gonna compare the roadmaps to IonQ, Rigetti, all the bunch of these companies. We're gonna compare. So stay tuned. All right, let's talk about the CHIPS Act, which was the $2 billion that was invested in quantum stocks, including D-Wave, a couple weeks ago. I wanted to spend a little time on this. We've run out of time to talk about this today, but feel free to look at our video from 2 weeks ago. We'll be linking to it in the comment section. This is not the end of the story. We are in the middle of some deeper investigations in the government documents associated with the deal, so do stay tuned for that. But unfortunately, that's all I could talk about now. I want to close out by announcing something that we are releasing to the industry completely free of charge. So this will be out in a couple of weeks for everyone watching this video. It's going to be our quantum computing industry scorecard system. I've been asked by investors about what I think about various quantum computing companies out there. And the problem in answering this is always that quantum is one of the hardest sectors to analyze. The technology is genuinely complex and the claims are going to be nearly impossible to verify. And so the gap between what companies say and what's real is enormous. And so to address this problem, I created something to fix this for investors. For months, we've been working on this to build this scorecard system. It's really the industry's first. This is not a ranking. This is not a top 10 list. This is a detailed research report that maps out every single major company in the space, and it uses a consistent methodology across all of them to give you a better insight into what's going on in the sector. The goal here is to separate what's verified, what's estimated, and what's pure corporate hype. The methodology covers what actually moves the needle. So the technology approach, we look at the technology approach that they're taking and what their real capabilities are. We're looking at roadmap credibility. We're looking at commercial traction among enterprise deals, government procurement. We're looking at the scientific validation out there for the technology, what the research community actually thinks about this. And then we're going to apply it consistently. And when you do that, the picture actually gets really interesting fast. Companies that sound like they're identical on the surface, they're actually starting to look really completely different in the details. We'll be releasing our scorecards free of charge to the community before early July. We're just making sure we do a really good job on this to keep you guys informed. Make sure to come to our website, subscribe for free on our newsletter, and that way you'll be the first one to know as soon as these things become public. Our website is coherence.report. We'll also publish news digests, and we have tons of educational material to help you follow along and better understand the industry. Thanks a lot, and I appreciate you spending time with me, and let's stay quantum.